The shriek of overstrained muscles was a chorus in my ear as I forced my legs to pump, each stride a fresh agony. Captain Valerius' final order, a desperate bellow before sinew and cartilage tore, was seared into my mind. "Fall back to the chapel! Protego!" The wet, tearing sound of his voice cut off still echoed, a gruesome counterpoint to the unholy cacophony at my heels. Behind, the horde screeching intensified, a symphony of the damned punctuated by sickening thuds, snaps, and choked screams as my militia comrades were caught in a relentless tide. A raw, primal urge clawed at me. Turn back. Fight. Avenge them! But the bitter truth smothered it. The outer walls were gone, shattered remnants against the tide of undeath. To turn was to offer myself to the slaughter, a pointless sacrifice. The chapel, hope's last bastion. My brother-in-arms were there, a thinning line against the encroaching darkness. If the chapel fell, our town, our home, would be consumed. If the chapel fell, every soul cowering within its consecrated walls, the terrified and innocent would be lost to the nightmare. Sarah's smile, warm as the summer dawn. Little Ashley, her laughter like wind chimes. Even John, that stubborn, infuriating bastard, his grudging nod of respect after our last brawl. Their faces, phantom images born of fear and adrenaline, flickered through the red haze of my vision. I ground my teeth against the fire in my lungs. Dozens of my brethren, the last of the town guard and militia, already manned the hastily erected barricades. Crude ramparts of overturned carts, broken pews, and packed earth, thrown up when the accursed Eclipse first stole the sun's light days ago. Ghouls with their loping unnatural speed, and the shambling, relentless undead were already clambering, clawing at the defenses, only to be met with spear thrusts and desperate axe falls. I saw them, men I'd shared watch with on the now fallen outer walls, sprinting alongside me, a desperate race against the grasping claws of the undead. Some weren't fast enough. A ghoul impossibly quick would pounce, or a shambler would ensnare a leg. I watched helpless, as familiar faces contorted with terror, then vanished beneath a wave of rotting flesh and snapping teeth. Torn asunder without the scant protection of the barricade or support of shield brothers. Their screams were brutally, mercifully short. A guttural snarl erupted inches behind me. I felt its fetid breath, hot and reeking of the grave, on the hairs of my neck. The shadow of a clawed hand stretched impossibly long towards my back. Every instinct honed from a lifetime of survival screamed at me to turn, to meet the threat, to fight. I choked down the urge, my gaze locked on the sanctuary of the barricade. Salvation was so close. Down! The shout, raw and urgent, ripped through the chaos. I saw him then, a militiaman, face grimy and taut with strain, his spear already drawn back, a glint of deadly intent in his eyes. I didn't question. Precious momentum was lost as I threw myself sideways, a desperate, sprawling dive. A searing cold as if ice tipped with razors tore into the layered shirt I wore, flimsy armor against the horrors. Immediately after, a sickening, wet thump squelch echoed beside my ear. Cold, thick ichor. The ghoul's vile blood splattered across my shoulder as its momentum carried its now speared carcass past where I'd been just a heartbeat before. No breath for thanks. I scrambled, hands raw over the rough-hewn timber of the barricade, tumbling to the ground within, every muscle screaming in protest. A waterskin was shoved into my grasp and I drank deep and desperate. The cool liquid was a fleeting balm against the inferno in my chest, air rasping in and out of my lungs between frantic gulps. There was no true respite. I hauled myself upright, lungs still burning, the frigid air a fresh torment. A subtle, chilling wrongness permeated the air around the chapel, a palpable miasma of dark magic that clung to the skin and sought to burrow into the very marrow. "That's the necromantic taint, lad!" Captain Valerius's voice, rough and wise, echoed in my memory. "Sours the air, it does. And it'll raise our fallen against us if we don't hold the line." He knew. He'd faced this before. Spirits rest his valiant soul. The fleeting moment of reflection was shattered. A heavy spear, its iron tip stained with old and new gore, was thrust into my hands by a grim-faced comrade. My arm, moving on instinct and training, was already drawing back as I lunged for the wall. A hulking zombie, its flesh sloughing from the bone, clawed its way through the newly formed gap. A gap where, a mere moment before, my rescuer had stood. 3 ghouls, a blur of frenzied motion, had overwhelmed him, dragging him screaming over the barricade into the writhing mass. I wish I could claim my thrust was a hero strike, precise and true, but in truth, it was a savage, desperate jab born from rage and exhaustion. The spearhead skidded, screeching off the side of the zombie's putrid skull, yet the force of the blow, a sheer and brutal momentum, was enough. It staggered, its single milky eye rolling, then collapsed like a broken puppet with its strings finally cut. 1 down. How many more to come? My luck, if it could be called that, was a battered shield, barely deflecting the inevitable. I thrust, parried, stabbed, a grim automaton fueled by adrenaline and the ghosts of my comrades. More of the dead, an endless rotting river surged from the blighted city. Their singular purpose to claw through our flimsy barricade, to desecrate the sanctified halls behind us, to extinguish the flickering flame of hope we guarded. The horde clawed forward, a tide of grasping hand and snapping teeth, and the silence from the city behind them was a damning verdict. No aid was coming. We were 24 souls against an army of the damned. A fragile bulwark tasked with holding, at least until the eclipse that felt like an eternity away finally relents. A bitter certainty settled into my gut, cold and heavy as a gravestone. I saw it mirrored in the haunted eyes of the men beside me. The walls were dust. There was nothing more between hunger of the undead and us, but our failing bodies and splintering steel. No rest, no reinforcement. The grand sages spoke of knights that could face down dragons, of heroes turning the tide against impossible odds. We were no legends, just tired, terrified men. Even if we summoned the spirits of those ancient champions, thirst would parch our throats, hunger would gnaw at our strength, and sheer bone-crushing exhaustion would drag us down long before the cursed sunless sky offered any reprieve. But as the precious blood-soaked minutes bled into one another, as our ranks thinned at horrifying speed, from 24 to a dozen, each gap in line a fresh wound in our collective spirit, it became terrifyingly clear we wouldn't need to worry about the drawn-out torment of attrition. Still we fought, each of our fallen friends a fresh ember of rage, each scream a renewed vow. There was no retreat from this, only the grave, and to yield, to break, was to condemn everyone. Sarah, Ashley, even that bastard John, to a fate worse than any battlefield death. My spear, already slick with ichor, snapped mid-thrust, the shaft splintering against the unnaturally dense bone of a hulking zombie. As I stumbled back from the recoil, a choked scream tore from the air to my left. A fellow militiaman, his face a mask of sudden agony, crumpled as a volley of crude, black-fleshed arrows slammed into him, their rotting wooden shafts snapping with the impact. Dark blood instantly bloomed over his tunic. "The north barricade is breached!" A voice, hoarse with panic, bellowed. "To the chapel doors! Fall back!" With a snarl, I hurled the jagged haft of my broken spear like a javelin. It struck a loping ghoul, square in its desiccated face, buying me a precious second. I abandoned my crumbling section of wall, sprinting a dozen desperate feet towards the heavy oak doors of the chapel. The guard who'd fought with stalwart courage to my right, since the man beyond him had been overwhelmed. The one who wordlessly passed me his water skin, which felt like a lifetime ago, let out a gurgling cry. An arrow, identical to the others, punched through his leather jerkin, protruding starkly from his chest. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. As he sagged, his eyes already glazing, I wrenched the worn longsword from his dying grip, his fingers briefly, desperately tightening against mine before going slack. The weight of it felt both foreign and terrifyingly familiar. There was no time for thought, only brutal instinct. A monstrous ghoul, all sinew and predatory hunger, was already vaulting the barricade where he'd stood. I met its charge with a desperate upward swing. The borrowed blade bit deep, cleaving through rotting clavicle into its chest cavity. A scream ripped from my throat. With a guttural roar, I tore my blade free, a wet sucking sound, and lunged for the chapel door. Another shape hurtled from the gloom, a sprinting zombie, arms outstretched. I swung again, a wide, desperate arc, the blade connecting to its outstretched arm, shearing through the decayed muscles and brittle bone, severing the limb just below the elbow. It didn't even flinch, its momentum carrying it forward in a relentless one-arm lunge. No time, no space for another sword strike. I lashed out with my mailed fist. The crack of its skull beneath my knuckles was sickeningly intimate, the brittle bone collapsing like dry parchment under a thin layer of putrid flesh, the impact shuddering up my arm. I felt the arrow strike my left shoulder before I heard the distant thwack of the bowstring. A searing, white-hot agony exploded through me, but no scream escaped my lips this time. There was no air, no energy for it. My vision grayed for a perilous instant. Far off, through the swirling dust and smoke, I saw it. A skeletal archer, knocking another arrow with deliberate, chilling precision. The pain was like a raging fire. The tearing of muscle as they moved was fresh torment. But it was distant, almost irrelevant. The world had narrowed to this doorway, this last, desperate stand. Only 3 other men still stood with me before the heavy oak, their faces pale, streaked with blood and grime, their eyes reflecting a grim, shared understanding. We were the last shards of a broken shield. My spirit uttered a silent, hopeless prayer to any spirit or ancestor that might still listen. Let the barricade we built behind these doors hold. Let it last through the eclipse. Then I stabbed forward into the oncoming tide, into the face of the leering corpse. The certainty of doom a cold stone in my belly. It couldn't possibly hold. A torrent of hot blood gushed from the ruin of my shoulder, and a chilling cold began to seep into my bones, far deeper than the frigid air. The relentless screaming agony of exertion, the fire that had burned in every muscle for hours, blessedly began to fade, replaced by an unnerving, hollow numbness. But this grim reprieve offered no strength. My sword arm, once an extension of my will, grew heavy as a tombstone, sluggish and unresponsive. Another shadow, a ghoul with eyes like dying embers, hurtled from the gloom. With a grunt that was more escaped air than effort, I managed to impale it, the blade grating on bone. I barely possessed the strength to kick the twitching corpse off my sword. I drew a ragged, shallow breath, and the world exploded. An arrow, cruelly swift, slammed into my chest with the force of a battering ram. The pain was a blinding supernova, a blistering thought, stealing breath. A wet, choking cough ripped through me, and I tasted the metallic tang of my own lifeblood. My legs buckled, no longer capable of bearing even my own depleted weight, and I collapsed backwards, sliding down the rough wall of the chapel, the sacred wood a cold comfort against my failing spine. Already the world was dissolving. My vision swam, dimming to a wavering tunnel. Through it I saw them, my brothers, the last defenders, being dragged from the chapel steps, their desperate cries swallowed by the snarls of the horde. One by one they were overwhelmed, torn apart with savage feasting sounds. A ghoul, its face a rictus of hunger, sprinted past my prone form, its burning gaze fixed beyond me. It ignored me completely, a fallen, spent thing. There was fresher, easier prey beyond the doors, the terrified cries of women, the shrill terror of children, the helpless huddled within. So this is how it ends. The thought was flat, devoid of surprise, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. The cold of true death, an invasion, unyielding presence, was creeping through my limbs, extinguishing the last ember of warmth. And with it, I felt that damn necrotic magic, a chilling infestation worming its way through my veins like tendrils of sentient ice. It whispered, not with words, but with chilling sensations. Promises of continued existence, of sensation beyond the grave. A horrifying mockery of resurrection twisted into an eternal nightmare. How long until I joined their ranks? I had seen strong men linger for hours, their souls clinging stubbornly to their ruined shells, while others, less fortunate, had risen in mere minutes, their eyes burning with that same unholy light. Would I awaken after everyone I'd sworn to protect was dead? A mindless beast amidst the slaughter? Or worse, would I be among the horde that tore them limb from limb? Ashley, her bright, innocent face. Sarah, her strength, her warmth. Their names were silent, cracking prayer on my fading conscience. My vision constricted, then winked out, plunging me into absolute blackness. And then, everything changed. Not with light, but with horrifying vivid clarity. I saw myself, towering and monstrous, standing over Ashley, my sweet, innocent Ashley, her small body broken, her eyes wide with terror that would haunt eternity. Blood thick and crimson stained my hands, dripped from my fingers. Sarah was there, kneeling beside our daughter's still form, shaking her. Her voice was raw, a keening sound of utter desolation, crying, begging for her to wake, pleading to any different spirit for someone, anyone to help. And I, the thing that was me, just stood there, a silent, blood-soaked sentinel of their despair. No! The denial was a silent detonation within the deepest core of my being, a roar of pure, undiluted soul. No, I will not. Not yet. I am not done. And they will not hurt them. A firestorm of unbridled rage, hotter than any pain, more potent than any magic, flared through the remnants of my spirit. It was an inferno of defiance. I would not let these soulless bastards slaughter everyone I knew, everyone I loved. And by all the spirits true and forgotten, I would not be the abomination that delivered the final killing blow. Suddenly, sensation slammed back into me. My vision cleared, preternaturally sharp. I could see everything with horrifying detail. The ghouls and zombies, a writhing tapestry of undeath, clawing and tearing at the splintering oak of the chapel doors. I heard the screams from within, no longer muffled but sharp, piercing cries of dawning horror, as those inside realized their sanctuary was about to be breached. Panic, raw and infectious, thrummed through the very stones. I tried to lift my arm, to raise my sword, but it was dead weight, unresponsive. The rage intensified, a volcanic pressure building within my chest, demanding release. I won't watch them die! Move! I screamed the command into the void of my own mind, a raw, desperate plea, and an unbreaking vow. And then my arm twitched, a spark. Slowly, impossibly, my fingers tightened around the sword hilt, the worn weather a familiar anchor. Then my legs, those traitorous limbs that had buckled, began to shudder, to push. I felt an agonizing resistance in every fiber of my being, as if tearing myself from the very grasp of the grave, but I didn't care. The pain from the arrows, the crushing exhaustion, the chilling numbness, it was all gone, burned away. The only thing that remained, pure and absolute, was my duty. I tried to let out a war cry, a sound to herald this impossible resurgence, but only a dry, broken rasp, like stones grinding together, escaped my throat. It didn't matter. Actions would speak louder than any shout. My sword, now an extension of my pure will, cleaved through the first ghoul in my path. the blades shearing through rotten flesh and bone as if it was water. Then a second, its snarl cut short with a spray of black ichor. The hulking zombie clawing at the door turned, its single eye fixed on me. It was not met with steel, but with my fist. Unlike before, where bone had met unyielding, decayed bone, and there was no jarring impact, no sensation of collision, my fist simply tore through its skull, a shocking and brutal eruption of force. There was no pain, no feeling of impact, just utter, silent destruction. An arrow, a black streak in the periphery of my vision, slammed into my side with the force of a smith's hammer. It didn't matter. My swing, a relentless arc of bone and battered steel, cleaved through another shambling horror. A frigid rage was all that I could feel, a hollow core where pain and fear had long since died. Even the insidious, cloying magic that had gnawed at my essence seemed to have retreated. Or perhaps I had simply passed beyond its touch. It didn't matter. Another shaft punched into my chest. The impact a dull thud I registered more as a splintering of my own ribs than a new agony. As I struggled to wrench my sword free from the spine of a particularly resilient zombie, a ghoul, stinking of charnel pits, sank its fangs deep into my sword arm. I felt nothing from its envenomed bite, registered no searing venom that should have been coursing through my veins, so it didn't matter. With my other hand, I seized the creature by its greasy hair and tore it free. The wet, sickening rip of cloth, of my own rotting mail, of flesh and muscle parting from the bone, filled my ears for a fleeting moment. The hours bled into an indistinguishable gray morass of slaughter. More injuries accrued, a shattered kneecap, a gouge that laid my jawbone bare, fingers shorn from my skeletal hand. I became a canvas of unholy ruin, yet I persisted. Some detached part of my consciousness registered the impossibility of it, the sheer biological defiance of my continued existence. I didn't know how I was still animate, let alone fighting. Thought became irrelevant. There was only my duty, only the unending line of shuffling death to meet and destroy. When my left arm, long since stripped of flesh and sinew by countless blows and grasping claws, was finally torn from its socket with a dry snap of bone, I didn't care. I drove my remaining fist, a bludgeon of naked bone, through the skull of the zombie responsible, then stooped, reaching for the severed limb. The bones were slick, crimson with gore that was both mine and theirs. With a dispassionate press, I shoved the ragged end of my humerus back into the splintered ruins of my shoulder. It stayed. And when I willed it, the skeletal fingers of the reattached hand twitched, then gripped. It didn't matter. More of the horde surged forward, a tide of insatiable hunger. And I, a thing of rage and reassembled bone, rushed to meet them. I didn't know how long I fought. A solitary, unyielding statue of defiance amidst the rising tide of the slain. Eventually, the first hesitant rays of the blighted dawn crept over the ravaged town, illuminating the charnel mountain of bodies I stood upon, a grotesque monument of the night's slaughter. And still the undead came, drawn in by some infernal call. Still I fought. The pale light of that grim day came and went. Another night of relentless butchery descended. Still I stood. And then another dawn came. It was only as the third sun began its ascent, its light glinting off the field of silent, unmoving bodies, that the last of the horde faltered, and finally, blessedly stopped. An eerie, profound silence settled over the devastation. For hours more I stood, unmoving, my vigil unbroken atop my gory throne. My duty was not yet complete. The cold rage still burned like a banked inferno in the hollow cavity of my chest, the only force that kept my shattered frame upright. Finally, the slow, deliberate movement that spoke of utter finality, I let the wrapped and twisted sword slip from my grasp. My hand, now nothing more than articulated bone, released it. The clang of steel on blood-soaked earth was deafening in the silence. I turned, a slow pivot of my ruined body, toward the chapel. I had to see them. I had to know that they were safe. That what I had endured, what I had become, had been enough. Each step was an eternity, a slow, deliberate drag of shattered limbs. I reached for the heavy oak door and knocked. my bony knuckles rapping out the old familiar pattern Captain Valerius had drilled into our heads so long ago. The signal for all clear. I waited, a grotesque sentinel of bone and will. I heard the muffled scrape of furniture being moved, the grating sound of heavy boards being pulled free, the hesitant whispers of human voices, raw with fear and disbelief. Then, with a groan of tortured wood, the doors creaked open. Inside, a sea of pale faces. Women, children, the few old men who had remained, stared at me with absolute, stunned silence. Their eyes, wide and reflecting the dawning horror, drifted past my skeletal form to the nightmare landscape of the bodies piled high behind me. And then, amongst them, I saw her. Sarah. Her face was a mask of shock and horror. But she was alive. She was holding Ashley fiercely, protectively, close to her chest. Ashley, whose small face was tear-streaked but whole. Alive. Safe. A profound, overwhelming peace, as cool and clear as spring water, flooded through the hollow where my heart had once beat. Then Sarah screamed, a sound of pure, undiluted terror and grief. A sound recognized not by a savior, but a monster. I looked down. My reattached arm, its duty finally done, slid from its precarious hold with a soft thud, landing on the blood-stained threshold. The rest of my body, as if those final threads of will had finally snapped, followed suit. I didn't fall so much as unravel, collapsing into a heap of shattered bone and ruined armor. At the foot of the door I had given everything to defend. But they would be okay. The thought was a whisper of certainty in the encroaching stillness. In time they would heal. They would rebuild. I had done my duty. And then, finally, I knew rest. Thus ends Eclipse, a tale not of glory but of defiance, the last stand of a man who gave everything to protect those he loved. The dead may rise again, but so too does the will to resist. If this chapter ignited something within you, show your support with a like and subscribe. The next tale is coming, and remember, together we shall uncover the truth, for in knowledge lies our strength, and in understanding our path.